What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, I'm going to talk about the news from yesterday of former NFL wide receiver Chris Hogan announcing that he's leaving the NFL to join the Premier Lacrosse League, and give you my thoughts on this move by Hogan and the PLL. And for those of you that don't know about Hogan's lacrosse background, he last played competitive lacrosse in 2009 for Penn State, where he tallied a team-high 29 goals and 34 total points that year. And he spent the last 9 years in the NFL with the Bills, Patriots, Panthers, and Jets, and he's currently 33 years old, and he'll turn 34 later this year in October. So the question here is, what chance does he really have of making a PLL roster? Currently, there's 8 teams at about what we can expect to be 24 to, I'd say, 26 roster spots for each team. So that's about 192 total roster spots in the entire PLL going into this summer. And this guy, keep in mind, hasn't played in a little over a decade now as we head into 2021. And not only that, but he'll be going up against supposedly the best lacrosse players in the world, just like he was going up against the best NFL players, the best football players, I should say, in the NFL for the last several years. He'll now be going up against the best lacrosse players in the world, or at least that's what the PLL likes to promote. But this offseason, on top of all that, is going to be the biggest offseason in pro lacrosse history, with all the influx of talent that we're about to see through the entry draft in the MLL and through the player pool and free agency and all of that, and the college draft as well. We've talked about it on past episodes of the podcast. Me and Phil, especially on that episode just about a week or so ago, talked about 1 through 32 in that college draft. You really can't go wrong with any of those picks, because 1 through 32, you're going to be able to find a stud with one of those picks that will probably be in the PLL for a long, long time. So one thing I want to compare with this Chris Hogan thing and him preparing kind of on his own to make the jump to the PLL is similar to what Paul Rabel was doing last summer before the championship series, where you saw the videos of him and the Instagram posts of him spending months practicing by himself on an empty net with really nobody out there defending him. And then you saw that transition to the championship series, where he struggled with his shooting ability and creating separation once he got into the championship series and he started facing some of those defenses like the Redwoods. And I think that you can draw a comparison to that, to what Hogan's been doing. You saw Paul Rabel share that text conversation that he and Hogan had about a month ago now, where Hogan was by himself practicing on a net with no goalie or anybody there. And again, it was kind of that same situation. So now imagine a guy like Hogan, who's only really been practicing by himself, which I think a lot of us do in our backyards anyway, like in the spring and summer. I know I do that a lot myself, but imagine a guy like Hogan, who hasn't played competitively in over a decade, hasn't really gone up against a goalie, hasn't really gone up against a defense. Imagine him going up against, in training camp, a guy like Jack Kincannon, Tim Troutner, or even 2-time goalie of the year Blaze Reardon. And then even just going up against defenders one-on-one, some of these long pulls that the PLL features, guys like Garrett Epple, Matt McMahon, Jared Newman, just to name a couple. And then on top of that, adding in some of the guys that are going to be brought in through the MLL and the player pool and that entry draft. You know, whoever ends up getting taken there, he is going to be facing some of the biggest competition that the sport of lacrosse has to offer, and he hasn't even played competitively since 2009. So there's really 2 ways, in my opinion, that Hogan actually makes a team. And I'd like to also preface this by saying, if I'm totally wrong here and you actually think he has a legitimate shot of making a team this summer, you know, please let me know. Like, I welcome any and all conversation to this topic, but this is just how I felt initially when seeing this news. But there's really two ways that I think Hogan makes a team this summer. The first is that he actually goes out there, he proves a lot of us wrong, including myself, and shows that he actually does have some high-level lacrosse left in him at 33 years old, and he actually goes out and earns a spot. But the one problem that I have with this, in terms of it being a problem for the league per se, is that if he goes out there after not having played competitive lacrosse since 2009 and he goes out there and wins a roster spot, it could potentially be a bad look for the PLL from a talent standpoint, promoting the fact that you have the best lacrosse players in the world and you are the highest level of competition in the sport, just like the NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA, whatever the case may be here in North America. When you promote the league in that way, and then a guy comes in essentially off the street, hasn't played competitive lacrosse in about a decade or so now, and earns a roster spot amongst some of the best lacrosse players in the world who have either spent the last handful of years in the PLL or spent the last handful of years in the MLL, I'm not really sure that that'll leave a positive mark on the PLL from an outsider's standpoint, somebody that is now paying attention to the league because they know Chris Hogan and the name, and they know he's an NFL guy, and they want to watch him potentially make a roster spot. So now they're watching the PLL and paying attention to it. And now they're sitting here thinking, well, this guy hasn't played competitively in 10 or 12 years. So how hard can it really be to make one of these 8 clubs? You know, how good is the talent really? And for anybody that's even watched a game or two, at least over the past 2 years, knows that this is a highly competitive, highly talented league. So again, I wonder what kind of a mark that would leave on the PLL if he were to make it. But then the other way I could see him making it, which I think is highly unlikely, but I think you'll definitely see some rumors, I guess you could say, if he does make a team, that this was potentially the way that it was done, would be if the league actually stepped in themselves and said, hey, we've put a lot into promoting this. We've had all these different things promoting the fact that, you know, Hogan made the jump to the PLL. Adam Schefter's been tweeting about it, whatever. So somebody's going to have to bite the bullet here and take this guy, give him one of the 24, 25 roster spots, whatever it is, and we'll almost do it like how they did with Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own, where he says, you know, I'm just here to sit on the bench and wave my little hat and give the fans a little something to cheer about. So if the league steps in and does that, then maybe he makes a team. But again, like I said, the chances of that actually happening are highly unlikely. But again, like I said, it's something that you'll probably hear rumblings about, you know, rumors being thrown around that that's something that happened. But I think, as I said, from a talent standpoint and being able to promote the PLL for what it is, being the highest level of lacrosse in the world, having a guy like Hogan essentially come in off the street and take one of these roster spots from the ridiculous amount of talent that's about to be coming in to this league might not be the greatest look for the PLL, but at least for the next 24 to 48 hours or so, it'll be a great thing for them to be able to promote the league and say that they got a former NFL player who I believe won a Super Bowl with the Patriots not that long ago to come over to the PLL. And like I said, you know, if I'm wrong and Hogan does make a roster, I'll be more than happy to eat my words on this episode. We can always circle back to this in the future. And I even said this to somebody on Twitter last night, that I will actually invite Chris onto the show if he makes a team, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about his time in the NFL. We'll talk about the time that he spent at Penn State playing lacrosse. We'll talk about what he's looking forward to with being in the PLL when that time comes, probably within the next month or two, I would imagine. So I will be more than happy to eat my words in saying that I don't think that he'll make a team, or that it wouldn't be such a great look for the league if he made a team. So I look forward to seeing what he does here over the next few months in attempting to make a roster. And And if nothing else, like I said, it was a great thing for the league to get their name out there. Like I said, Adam Schefter was tweeting about it last night, so obviously great exposure for the league as a whole. But my final thought with this topic is, does having a guy like Chris Hogan making that jump from a league like the NFL to the PLL at the age of 33, does that leave the door open for a guy like Pat Spencer, who played lacrosse more recently and was a Tewaaraton winner not that long ago, and he's only turning 25 this summer on July 4th from what I've read is when his next birthday is, so he'll only be turning 25 this summer, so obviously several years younger than a guy like Chris Hogan. I would be interested to see if that's something that leaves the door open for a guy like Pat Spencer to come to the PLL and play for a team like the Archers or whoever ends up getting him as part of a future entry draft. But that will do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. Let me know your thoughts about Chris Hogan's attempt at joining the PLL. Let me know what you think about Pat Spencer possibly joining in the near future. You can also find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor Podcast, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, basically anywhere you get your podcast. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.